In prison, I lived with a serial killer for 6 months before I found out he was a serial killer. So in 2004, I was transferred to Nottoway Correctional Center in Virginia. I was 19 years old, I was fresh in the system, this was my first major prison, and I had no idea what I was doing. So all the old heads at the jail and at receiving had told me, make sure you get a job, stay out of the way, do your time, and make sure you can go home. So that's what I did. I put in for every job I could. The only job I could get was in the woodshop, and that meant I had to get moved from the normal pod to the woodshop pod because they had like a kitchen pod and a woodshop pod and a non-smoking pod, just special pods for certain jobs or conditions. So they packed me up. I moved all my stuff over there, and as I walked in, the cell popped open, and there was this little old man sitting there drinking coffee and watching TV. And I was like, all right, this is great. Because my biggest worry when I was moving to a cell was, am I going to get some young guy? Am I going to get some gang guy? Am I going to get somebody who has drama with him? And this little old man did not look like he was going to have drama. And in fact, it was great. We introduced ourselves. We got along well. I would see him at work. Things went really smoothly. And I was young at that point. I was really young. I was ignorant. I didn't know what I was doing. And he was really helpful. He helped me work on my vocabulary. We talked about a lot of things. When I first got locked up, I couldn't shave. I couldn't grow a beard. So I didn't know how to shave. I didn't know about shaving with the grain or against the grain. So I remember I was struggling one day at the sink, and he said, Jesse, it'd be a little bit easier if you went with the grain. And if you want a tighter, shave, make sure you go again. He just explained these things to me that I had never known because, I hadn't had the opportunity. So I grew to really like Greg. He was this guy who was a comfortable cell partner, who gave me space, who would, was good to talk to. It was fun to watch Jeopardy with him. It was just a nice situation because, for the most part, it's just about being comfortable. In prison, it's not about everything being perfect because nothing's going to be perfect. You're in prison. But if you can find somebody you can share space with and just be comfortable, that's 90% of it. Having a good cell partner is 90% of your bit. So anyways, we were going along, and one of the things that I noticed was that I got mail, and I got visits, and I got to talk on the phone, and he never got anything. Nobody ever reached out to him. He never got on the phone. And I started feeling bad because we had talked about his story, and he said that, he had a murder charge and that he had previously been in the feds for something, but, it didn't sound like he was the worst guy. And I say that because in prison, you get used to everybody having murder charges. You're getting everybody having robbery charges. Like, you may look down on certain things, but for the most part, I just didn't think anything about it. It was part of my daily life. So I asked my stepmom. She had lived over in Japan, and Greg had been stationed over in Japan when he was in the army. And he had told me all the stories about growing up, about spending time. And I was like, you know what, maybe they would get along. They both have traveled the world. They both have had these weird, varied experiences. Like, maybe I should hook him up. So I asked my stepmom if she'd be willing to write him. My stepmom was kind of a thorough and cautious person. So she came to visit me, I don't know, maybe a week or two later. And she said, Jesse, I've got to talk to you about something. I said, yeah, what's up? She said, your cell partner is a serial killer. And I said, okay. Like, I don't know how to process that. I don't know what that means. And she breaks his story down that he had been convicted of one murder, but this wasn't like a drug murder or like a murder out of anger. This was where he had apparently abducted this woman, sexually assaulted her, and then buried her in a shallow grave. And that kind of changed the way I looked at Greg, right? Because this quiet old man who seemed really nice was now suddenly the kind of guy who would, kill somebody and put him in a shallow grave. And I didn't know what to do with that. Like, I felt really uncomfortable, but I also knew I had told him that I was going to try to get her to write. And I also felt like I had to kind of clear this up because if I didn't, I would walk around really, really awkward. So I walked back to the cell, and I remember it probably took me a day or two. I don't know exactly how long, but I finally said, Greg, I got to talk to you. My mom, or my stepmom, was going to write you, and she looked up, she looked up your stuff, and before I could even get it out, he said, yeah, you did your homework. And he gave me this laugh that just scared the shit out of me. Because all of a sudden, all that, kind of feeling or that doubt or the intellectual reality of him being a serial killer hit home. And we lived together for about 3 more months. It wasn't like I could just get out of there. Like, I guess I could have checked in and gone to the hole, but, I was young and my pride wouldn't let me do something like that. So I continued living with him. And it actually wasn't worse. But the weird thing was that it was so normal, except for when we would talk about certain things. Like, he started bringing up, yeah, the FBI came to see me one time when I was in the feds. They were accusing me of some things that they said I had done, and he had this smile on his face. It's like, haha, I tricked them, motherfuckers kind of smile. And that really made me uncomfortable. But anyway, so he talked about these things, never admitting that he had done anything. But I later found out, I actually didn't find out the full details until I got out. They'd been accused of killing like 16 different women, that had been this just insane thing, that he had, been this incredibly well-decorated military serviceman in Vietnam, but that had come back and they said cracked with reality. Now, he told me that he had worked for the CIA after Vietnam, that he had done contract work in Africa, that he'd done contract work in Southeast Asia, that he had done all these different things. But the official story I read years later is that the CIA or the government said, no, he had nothing to do with that. He never worked for us. He clearly had a break from reality due to all the trauma or the shell shock or the whatever from Vietnam. I don't know what to believe. Like, I think it is kind of far-fetched to think that the CIA would set him up by killing some woman and burying her in a shallow grave, but it was really strange to me that he knew as many things that he knew and had all these decorations and done so well in Vietnam. But anyways, I didn't know he was a serial killer for 6 months. I found out he was a serial killer. It really messed me up for that day, but nothing really changed about him. I think that's kind of the strangest part, is that he stayed being the person that he was, and I stayed being the person that I was, and we stayed getting along as cell partners, you know? He ended up getting moved to a medical unit because he had all these terrible medical issues, he had all these things going on, and he ended up dying in prison. But it helped me realize that no one is just one thing. That was probably the first time I really ran across it and understood. Like, he really may have been a predator. He really may have been a terrible person. At the same time, he was a comfortable person to live with. I don't think that's a validation of who he is, or that doesn't, you know, expiate his sins or make anything okay. But it made me realize that people can be very different in very different situations. And that's been an important lesson for me to understand.